Everybody in? Cool. Hey guys, welcome. Hope everyone joining in is doing well, healthy, and safe. Yeah, we're really excited to have everyone here for our event. This is how to build a sports tech brand in 2021. So the way it's going to work is I'm just going to give a brief about the event, and then we'll let John and Konstantin introduce themselves, and then yeah, we can get started straight away. A heads up from the audience: if you guys have any questions for John or Konstantin, feel free to send them in the chat. My friend Jonah here will be checking your questions, and he'll pass them on to me to give to the guys. Okay, so let's kick it off. So first, a little bit about PR Lab. Well, we're a community of Marcom professionals in the Netherlands, 1,200 strong. We host events each month, to examine and explore the wider marketing communications industry, just to kind of learn and improve our craft, but also build our awareness to what's happening today and what's going to happen tomorrow. Which is why we've invited these two seasoned professionals in sports and sports tech, marketing and PR, to tell us about their exciting industry. It's not really part of our remit as an agency, so this is kind of a brand new step for us as well. So we're also learning with you guys tuning in. We have Konstantin, who's going to represent the in-house sports tech company side of things from Beyond Sports, and then we have Jon, who has his own agency, Twotone, who's gonna give us a bird's eye view from the agency perspective. So now, guys, Konstantin, Jon, you guys introduce yourselves, and then we can dive right in.
I'll let you go first, Konstantin.
Cheers. Hey guys. Great to be here from North Holland, almost one of the northest point right now. I'm on Texel in Small Island, part of North Holland. Enjoying a little bit of a day off, but I'm really happy to be here, obviously. And so my background is, as you said, in sports tech. But before that, before I moved to sports tech, I was actually more in performance marketing and in performance campaigns, mobile marketing. Worked in a couple of different companies in a couple of different countries. I'm from Berlin originally, but then lived in Dublin, lived in San Francisco, lived obviously in Amsterdam, and now in Alkmaar, where Beyond Sports is sitting. Made the switch from advertising over to sports tech. Joined a company in Amsterdam called Mykuju, which is more focused on OTT platforms, which got acquired by 11 Sports recently. So that really got me into the sports tech world, and now joined about a year and a half ago Beyond Sports, which does some really cool stuff that I could probably talk about for hours and hours. It's still quite tricky to explain, but it's basically visualizing positional player tracking data on on any kind of platform, and we've worked together with the NFL, but also with the EPL and the Dutch Eredivisie, and so I'm heading up business development and marketing for Beyond Sports.
Bam. My name is Jon. I'm originally from the United States. I've lived here in the Netherlands going on 8 years. Twotone is my company, which is about 6.5 years old. We do PR marketing mostly in the cycling industry. Originally got my start. I saw Hugo just joined. I was doing sales and lead generation and like more of the startup and tech space back when Twotone first got started, but we've kind of went entirely into cycling. Sales and PR have kind of always been my thing. I used to have my own bike shop in the United States, so I've done a little bit of project management, also in translation agency, then sales for back-end web development, full stack app development. So there's a lot of overlap here with like the tech and sports thing already. That's mostly it. If anybody has any other questions, later in the talk I can answer them. But yeah, thanks for having me. I think this space where like tech and sports, in my case cycling, I think we'll talk a lot about football as well, is super exciting.
Thanks, guys. We're really glad to have you here, and I think it's going to be a really great talk. So Konstantin, let's start with you, man. Since you work for a sports tech company, this is how to build a sports tech brand. Why don't you tell us, with Beyond Sports, what does your day-to-day look like? How do you guys try to keep building your brand as you evolve as a company? The journey from start to finish, obviously, but the day-to-day, the grind, and what are the challenges that you guys face, and how do you kind of navigate them? I think you're muted.
Yes. Here we go. Yeah, so the host has to unmute me, so that's good. That's actually perfect, because otherwise there's always these background sounds, so I think that's great. Beyond Sports is an interesting case because the background is full-on B2B, which obviously has different brand building avenues than B2C. Some of it is easier, some of it is probably a bit trickier. And so the fun thing is I kind of joined Beyond Sports when they started making the shift over from a pure B2B company over to trying out more B2C things, to put it very broadly. And that obviously has a big impact on how you have to go about your brand. It first of all brings the whole backpack of branding that you've already worked with, which is tricky because people see you for that one company that you've always been, which is, a VR training, which is basically what we've done at the beginning, performance player training with VR goggles to be able to allow academy players to put themselves in the shoes of professional players. And then everybody sees you in that way. But then you're trying to launch something new, which is more about working with broadcasters or even the leagues directly to think about more, consumer-facing applications. And then they still see you as, but you guys are just doing the training stuff, right? So I think, a little bit of almost like back to school stuff. You have to obviously get down with your value proposition. You have to understand what do you actually propose, what's your vision even internally. Sometimes you have to really fight and struggle internally to make everybody understand that we're not that pure B2B company anymore. We now want to go out to the world and obviously talk about our brand in this way. And it might explain also why a lot of companies, and I've been part of a few that have gone through full-on rebrands. Makuju, as an example, has now within 3 years done 2 rebrands. One was the old kind of greenish, then there was a new branding strategy, making it a bit more the challenger brand. And then the third one was obviously now rebrand, part of the acquisition. So that's kind of the trickiest part when, especially in startups, you kind of pivot, which for lack of a better word is what you do. How do you avoid being seen for what you've kept on doing and now you want to do something new? And sometimes rebranding is maybe the only way. And then sometimes it's adding new brands to what you currently are doing. And so kind of that's what we're doing. We've built up kind of our Blocky brand, which is not really a brand, but it's the puppet or the visualization that we're using at the moment to visualize players on the pitch, which is kind of a Minecraft character. And so Blocky for us is kind of a new brand that we work with. But we have to develop that brand. We have to work around and see how we can use it. We have to, get resources internally to help us make more Blocky content. So it's quite tricky, I have to say, for a company which is, very technically focused and only has 2 or 3 people that do marketing and kind of creative design. To get the resources to do these things. And it's kind of the longer journey, but overall I would always start with get your value proposition right, make sure that you know what your vision is, and then what's your main, I think 2 or 3 big goals that you want to achieve with that brand and towards your clients. And then I guess at some point you have to make a choice. Do I stick to my current brand? Do I try to juggle 2 or 3 at the same time? And then you have to make a bit of a branding strategy and obviously stick to that. But at some point, you have to kind of wiggle these different approaches. But I think it's interesting and exciting because you get to work on multiple brands and projects at the same time. And you just have to make sure that you don't get confused.
I was curious about that. How do you guys manage it internally with the different brands, right? For B2B and B2C, what do you guys do together to kind of make sure things aren't crossing, interfering with each other or getting lost in your own over communications? How do you guys delineate how you communicate for each B2C or B2B and keep it clean and clear and coherent for your target audience?
Make the UI UX department or person in your company your best friend, because kind of they know what design and how design works, how the user experience works, and why, if maybe me as kind of a sales and marketing guy, I think this is exactly what you should do because I believe that this is the shiny thing that everybody needs to go for. Somebody who understands how UX and UI works will tell you, no, you have to actually do it that way. There's actual research that explains why things are done the way that they're done. So that's one of the biggest learnings I've had because I haven't really worked that much with pure UI UX people. So that's a good one. And in general, just talk a lot to obviously also the upper levels. Make sure that you talk to your CEO, the CTOs, that you align on how you word things and how you communicate stuff down. Because if they on one day say, well, today everything's about Blocky or that, and if the next day everything is about these guys, it confuses the workforce. So I'd really make sure that you kind of obviously get everybody on board, but that's sometimes tricky. So focus on UI UX because they're really good at what they're doing, but also make sure that especially the top management is in line and on board with your strategy.
Cool. So I guess this kind of leads into, like, in a sense, the agency perspective, Jon, right? Because you're juggling multiple clients. It's kind of like B2B, B2C. So, and you have to communicate with that upper echelon as well. So how do you do that? How do you leverage opportunities from multiple clients at a time? And like, how do you create and sustain this media attention for them in a really correct and proper way?
Yeah, I guess it's the first thing that makes me think of is something that I think I'm often like quoted in saying, and certainly like our modus operandi for the whole agency is when we're pitching media, like how do we make ourselves helpful? I mean, the key word is like kindness. I don't think it's a word that people typically think of when they think of like PR agencies, also coming from sales. People are used to being like pitched and like spammed, and you're trying to get a meeting, close a deal, or you want to get that clipping and get that story, and you're just like beating down the door with whatever that pitch is. But we found if when we're contacting editors, it could be other kinds of people. Often in our industry has to do with like influencers, but different kind of people that are creating content. We want to talk about our clients' products. If we ask them what they're working on, then we can kind of finesse what we're pitching based on what they're trying to talk about. Maybe that's multi-tools, maybe it's cycling apparel, maybe it's we work with Wahoo Fitness, that's also from Atlanta, where I'm originally from, and they have a navigation device that goes in your handlebars that can tell you where you're going, but it also can track with your heart rate, and in combination with like a power meter can tell you how much energy you're putting into your pedals. So depending on what that person is into, we can kind of yeah, customize the way that we're pitching them and not bark up the wrong tree. One recent example of this is contacting editors from also bigger outlets for an e-bike client of ours. And from what I kind of understood between the lines of what you're saying is like if there's not necessarily a launch or like a big story, we don't have like a big news item to pitch them. E-bikes are quite popular right now, maybe on the more relaxed end of like the sports description. But this was an editor at Mashable, hadn't ridden this bike before, is kind of tasked or interested personally and with writing about e-bikes, and we're able to get like a big outlet to talk about a product that's been around for several years, actually. So I think it's really just finding out people are interested in what they're wanting to talk about, and approaching it from a totally different perspective than this like spray and pray of a very templated outreach.
So it's kind of blending, like you said, being genuine, and then also being kind and finding out what works for the editors themselves. I think that's a great way of doing it. But I also find that being genuine sometimes it's hard to be effective as well. It's hard to come across as kind and genuine. And I mean, I don't know the sports and sport tech scene so much, but it can be cutthroat to kind of navigate your way in there. How do you convey a message or an opportunity like that? By being genuine and kind, but also being persuasive.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good segue, actually. What that makes me think of, and Konstantin and I spoke about this before. I was fortunate to be around the very early days of Zwift. We can't really have everyone in the audience here raise their hands. That's typically what I would do. Who knows about that? It's just kind of, I don't know, it's probably the wrong analogy, but for people that aren't into this sort of thing, is like Gran Turismo, or multiplayer like cycling games. You hook your bike in your living room up to this trainer, to your computer, and you're riding with other people in this like virtual island, as it literally is. And back then in 2014, to your point, you had to kind of exude this authority of, you don't know about this yet, but this is what's going to be the next thing, which can be quite hyped. Like we've done a lot of like crowdfunding PR support, and that's risky when you're trying to talk about like the next big trend. But for the people that want to like stay abreast of those kinds of things, you do have, the opportunity to be much more, what's the word, like opinionated or convincing about those kinds of things. And it takes time. So like, for instance, for us, now that we've been around going on 7 years, we're less likely to take these like one and done crowdfunding projects. Whereas if we identify something, let's say like Zwift, I think most people knew that had the potential. And certainly, like Konstantin had said earlier, before we all got online here, during the Corona epidemic, tons of people were staying home running Zwift more than anyone could have anticipated. So it's even bigger than I think they could have hoped for. But back in 2014 and 15, it's something that we were able to convince people like, hey, pay attention to this. And that was a unique opportunity. I know you can't apply that to everything, but I think that mentality you can, if you just really find ways to make sure people understand like this is something you should pay attention to.
So I mean, I guess that so start off when it's coming out, you believe in the product, you have the story to tell, and it can pay off to be a bit risky and a bit audacious, is what you're saying.
I think the audacious thing, yeah, I'm American, so that kind of comes naturally. But I do try to like empower the people in our team. Like, you don't have to be coy about this. And I think because in sales and PR, and I guess marketing to a degree, if you're, depending if it's the B2B side or B2C, you have to get used to kind of the rejection. So you know that a lot of your outreach isn't going to stick, but you should go with your gut and really believe in it for sure.
I think that goes for all industries, right? I mean, you got to get used to rejection at some point or another. We have a question actually for Konstantin. He's going back to the rebranding. He wants to know, rather than the usual route of rebranding, why not simply announce services expansion to cover new market opportunities? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I saw that. Good question. It's sometimes trickier. It depends a bit. And if you're marketing a new service to the same group of clients, then yes, of course, kind of do that. But if by launching something new under the same umbrella, you have a completely different target audience, then that might actually be a bit tricky. Even if sometimes you're building something new to existing clients, but you have to speak to different departments within that client, that again makes it a bit different, because you're kind of hoping that obviously the contacts at the company or league or association that you've been working with, they would kind of be your best evangelist and be like, okay, well, yeah, we've been working with Beyond Sports and we've been doing this and this with them. You should try them out. Actually, sometimes they would actually sell you in the wrong way. So that's the tricky part with trying this. But obviously, I would test it out first, of course, before you do a full-on rebrand. See how, test maybe with a good client and somebody you really like, maybe test it out a bit and then see if they understand it, and if you have a good relation with them, maybe that's something you could do.
I would add, I already mentioned Wahoo and like the navigation device, but they also make the trainers that you can use for Zwift and heart rate monitors, and now even like a watch you can use when you're doing a triathlon or running, those kinds of things. But in Wahoo's case, they are still a relatively small company compared to their competitors. So actually, to this topic, the rebrands, kind of contrary to what Hugo was saying here, isn't like necessarily announcing the service expansion, which there are a number of new devices. It's reminding like the public, like consumers, but also editors and publications that are looking for like advertising spend, or even partners when it comes to like supply chain or what have you. They're like, whoa, we're still like the little underdog brand that you guys like, fell in love with 2 or 3 years ago. We're not like that big dog. So often that's the case also in the startup world, where somebody thinks like this big brand name is like this big corporate company with a tremendous amount of, I don't know, firepower, budget, or, manpower, whatever might come with that like assumption. But sometimes the reminder is that they're not as big as they appear to be.
Right. Thanks, Hugo, for the question. So basically, what we're talking about, reaching out to the media, the rebranding, new service expansions. At the end of the day, it all comes back to external comms, right? So what kind of external comms do you guys use and find successful, especially within the sports tech intersection and sports? What do you find effective, the most effective for you guys?
Yeah, I'll dive in. I mean, I can kind of speak from our own experience for our own agency. One thing I try to stay pretty religious about is like putting out our own newsletter. One time, this was maybe 2011 or 12, the company that merged with another company that brought me to the Netherlands, they were a back-end Ruby on Rails company that I was doing sales for. And we were in the same building as MailChimp, and MailChimp had brought in Seth Godin, if anyone knows the book Permission Marketing or this concept in general. So when you subscribe to a newsletter, when you follow someone on social media, you're like giving them permission to like give you Kool-Aid, like you signed up for that. So for our newsletter, that's kind of like how we establish our own expertise in our industry, also create this kind of personable rapport with people that's like random subscribers, it's industry subscribers. That kind of tone of voice translates into our social media. One other thing is kind of really like rudimentary even, but it's the way that I do email follow-ups. Like if I have an opportunity, maybe it's with an editor, maybe it's a business contact or whoever that might be, I use a tool called Write Inbox. I think it's baked into Gmail now anyway, but you can set a reminder, like snooze it for 3 weeks, 3 months, 6 months. Like this is like really basic stuff. So when you think about like external communications, that's kind of riding the line. I mean, it is external because you're emailing people outside of your organization, but that could be public facing, the permission marketing stuff, or just how you communicate with people. I think even this talk today is an example, like getting mentions from partners, getting our clients, but also ourselves mentioned in interviews, webinars and talks like this. But then this pay it forward idea that I think very much comes from the startup world, like how do I get those opportunities for our partners, even people that I know? And then it creates this like serendipitous, self-fulfilling prophecy. The analogy or the illustration I always use is like all these concentric circles of a Venn diagram, and like how do we put ourselves right in the middle by like doing all these favors for people. That's kind of the general philosophy from my end.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. It's I just thought, was it 6 months ago or something, when Clubhouse blew up, and obviously you're getting the message from obviously the higher, like let's say the higher placed people in the companies, like we need to have a Clubhouse. You know, it's like, okay, let's kind of first start and see what's working, what's not working. So there's a couple of interesting things that you can always talk about when talking about external comms. But I kind of am a fan of keeping it kind of almost like old school. So I like these old school approaches because nowadays you're getting, especially when I get inundated with emails or other like communication efforts, like I get too much, and I know that our clients, I mean, we're not the only ones emailing them or trying to call them. So I'm a fan of either being very creative, which we used to do back in advertising when there's not even, it's more of actually a sales technique, because in a way, like external comms, it's kind of also selling, you know, on communicating and selling what you have. We used to send every Friday a couple of boxes of pizzas to the client. And I think after 6 months, we did it for every Friday. Then we finally got a call back. So that's a fun idea, you know. So these kind of a bit more personalized approaches I really like. Obviously, it depends really on what your client base is and what you're communicating. At MyKuju, we've obviously used kind of email scheduling tools like HubSpot or like CRM tools that obviously make that a lot more easy. And to follow up on conferences, you kind of collect all the business cards. You scan them in, and then you follow up. But I personally am a bigger fan of those more one-to-one approaches, but they take more time. But I do believe, and I hope it works, that as a receiver of those more personalized messages, you would appreciate that more. But maybe I'm just making up my own arguments. But those are kind of some of the fun things that we're doing. And then I think what's always obviously a bit different when it comes to external comms is, again, who's receiving that message and how, what message do you want to conceive and convey. When we did our first couple of B2C tests, obviously we built, because we do some really cool visualization stuff with player tracking data with those blocky characters. We created a TikTok account just to see if we just randomly put those clips out there, you know, what happens to the audience? Where's the audience coming from? So it gives you a ton of learning, if you have that kind of approach. And then we had that one moment, was it 3 months ago, where all of a sudden one video went viral. We don't know why, and all of a sudden it had 400,000 views, and the account grew from 200 followers to over 10,000 in just a day. And that's obviously super cool. And you kind of take these baby steps to kind of learn from. And since then, we've been growing kind of continuously, but nothing crazy. So, I mean, test out a few things as well. But again, and then a bit going back to the brand that you have, the brand should allow you to do these types of approaches, because otherwise, if it's against what your kind of value proposition is or your vision is, then that kind of goes against your brand as well, a tiny bit as well. So, but I personally prefer those a bit more, say, personalized approaches to those mass market approaches.
I was gonna say, you notice we didn't say like Instagram ads or Facebook ads.
Yep.
The other one fun one I was gonna mention from like the bike side is, if you do a group ride with people, there's a tool called Strava, which also works for running. So I think a lot of people here, this is a sports talk, so people are probably familiar with Strava. They've been around for ages now, but you can see who you rode with. And if you shake your phone, you can give everyone in that group kudos in one go. And often in my case, I would be handing out stickers that have this logo on it to everyone. And then the real secret sauce is looking at those names on LinkedIn. So if I'm riding at a trade show, if I'm traveling or whatever. So there's like these little hacks, which kind of go to Konstantin's things of like one-on-one stuff. And the last kind of anecdotal thing is when I've talked to, or actually in a presentation series I used to host here in Amsterdam, the approach wasn't expanding into a country or even another city. They would talk about expanding into a neighborhood of that city, and getting like the word of mouth, depending on who you're trying to close the deal with. This is way more on the sales end, but it could also be a marketing thing from a neighborhood perspective. Back to the e-bike example, like do wheat pasting or do billboards in that neighborhood, or that area, and then see what kind of traction you can build there, instead of thinking of like a national, like we're gonna like take over Germany now or something. Like, how do you do that? It's like those baby steps in that like bite-size approach and that experimental idea of seeing what works in these little campaigns, as opposed to throwing so much budget in like, yeah, a German or Dutch like Instagram campaign for a whole country. It's not going to work.
Would you say that like kind of this bite-sized approach would it necessitate being more personal, like Konstantin was talking about? Like you'd have to do a little bite-sized approach. You'd have to be quite, curating these things, outreach.
I think it's like micro demographics almost. I mean, I'm always going to keep using bike examples. People just think of like bikes, but there's roadies, like the Tour de France kind of guys. There's mountain bikers. There's people that commute and don't really consider themselves cycling. And then there's subsections of those, like the commuters, the ones that ride e-bikes and don't, the ones that have cargo bikes for their kids.
Fixie bikes.
Yeah, exactly. No brakes. You dig down and you find out who those people are. Maybe it's not like an early adopter thing, but like I have some notes for other topics we might cover, but that's the thing, I think, as opposed to being everything to everybody. And that's pretty common advice, I think.
Yeah. All right, we have another question. This one's about the Van Moof success story of their crowdfunding, the 2019 membership crowdfunding. He wants to know whether it was hyped in the media or not. What do you guys think?
Funny, just for me, maybe because I know you'll probably know about it. Even though I'm a cyclist, I didn't even know that they have a big crowdfunding, which is it's actually interesting because I am quite a lot into bikes. I know Van Moof a lot, but interesting. I kind of missed that they had a crowdfunding. So
I think it was more of like a pre-order, but I'm not entirely sure. I think, and Van Moof is a brand certainly that I've like admired for a lot of their decisions, but also been quite critical of a lot of other decisions. And when it comes to media, they've done a great job. I mean, they use the same tool that we use for our newsroom and a lot of our clients, PR.co, that makes it really easy for editors to get all the information that they need. I think cycling can be very like anachronistic in that way. Like people are sending like PDFs to editors and the text is hard to get out. It's like hard to follow. And like Van Moof has been really smart about that. I think their bike looks unique, like the frame does, and they're very bold. Back to one of the first points, he's putting some quotes in here, yeah. And they're very bold about their claims and their positioning, like quotes like "ride the future." So if you're like riding this like crappy bike and you're like, "Tim, I think I need to upgrade," and then you see these things like "ride the future," and you see them in all these different tech outlets or mainstream like newspapers and so forth, and you're like, "Well, man, maybe that's the bike for me." But from like a discerning perspective, I'm like, "Well, let's scratch the surface on like the quality of the components and other like value proposition details that maybe a more discerning consumer might consider." That's where the rubber hits the road, but I think they've done a great job with the way they've been able to get into the media, and that led to the success of the crowdfunding for sure.
Yeah, it's like I do know Van Moof. I'm not a big cycling guy like both of you, but obviously I know Van Moof. So clearly they've done their brand building well, and they've built a community around it, which I think is pretty critical for across all industries, but particularly in sports tech with niche products and services and things like that that not many people know. So you got to really build a loyal community, right, to kind of help your brand grow. What kind of efforts have you guys tried out and found successful in kind of outreach and creating a community around the brand, your brand in particular, Konstantin, and also you, Jon, with multiple brands? Like, what's the tactics there for building a brand, the community? Yeah.
I mean, obviously, as probably everybody knows, it's you always have some sort of ideas, but then once that goes into plan, there's other things that pop up. So I don't think there's always there's one recipe. I mean, I think we've made more mistakes than we've made good things, that we probably had a couple of lucky shots as well. So I mean, I think the combination of obviously working with good people and just trying out things, that's a good start. I don't think you can plan anything perfectly unless you've done multiple things with the same company, and then you can kind of learn from your past. But even then, I think you see companies trying out new things that fail and then trying out new things that kind of work. So I think in general, there's never really that one recipe, but maybe again, talking about the approaches that we've taken with TikTok, which was for us completely new. We didn't really know that would work. And that's maybe also something that I want to kind of say at the end, like don't get discouraged by maybe not seeing the success right away. I mean, you're building a brand, like you need to also learn from that. I mean, I think maybe even one of the most important things before you're trying new approaches is how you're going to measure it. What are the kind of KPIs that you set yourself? You just want to get some more views. Do you want to get more followers? Do you want to translate those followers into clicks onto your websites or onto your web shop? Or so for us, it was always very important, and that's maybe where my marketing background really helped, is understanding kind of what you want to achieve with that content. And especially at Beyond Sports, where we kind of have limited resources on the creative design side, the product manager, because I have to ask for resources to get the ability to make these things or make these creative assets. I always ask me, okay, so what's the goal here? Why should I do this and not have this 3D designer work on something which might benefit that client? So that's actually a good challenge to actually ask yourself. What do I want to achieve with this? And so for the TikTok approach, it was just I need a resource for at least 2 to 3 months. That's kind of what I set myself up as a goal, that just generates 1 or 2 clips out of Dutch Eredivisie content or the Premier League content per day. That is just these blocky characters in different environments. They can play on Mars, they can play on the moon, they can play on the beach, just scoring goals or like having fun, fun moments, and just see if there's something that works. Does it work if you have a specific text on the thumbnail? Does it work if you have a specific font? Does it work if it's on the moon that's being played or on Mars? Are those specific, like test it obviously, and then set yourself the KPIs and then follow what's happening. And then that one clip that got the most views was a Berghuis, a goal from Feyenoord, I believe. And that was mainly done because he scored a goal the day before with the Dutch national team. And so that old clip of his just got picked up also by the algorithm of TikTok, which we have no control over. So that's kind of the luck part. And from then on, it kind of started going. So I guess I can talk about it a lot in saying like there's no really recipe, but just test out things, but also make sure that if you test it, you're able to track it and able to measure it and set yourself some goals.
Cool. Thanks, Konstantin. What about you, John? From the agency side of things, how are you doing?
Yeah, I think for me, like I've just become like radicalized with this idea of like offline community stuff, which of course has been difficult during. Can I help you? Please, thank you. Got a little guest here. Doesn't know what he's looking for, and I don't have it either. But for me, like because during Corona, it has been so difficult to get people in the same place. Like even group rides weren't allowed, or they were kind of frowned upon. It depended on the country. People didn't know what they were able to do. So whereas like we've had a lot of fun projects doing launch rides and events, and we'd get people in a place, and this kind of word that I know isn't new, but this like cultural imprinting, which is maybe like a buzzword, but like getting people to talk about it. Maybe they saw it in a commercial, maybe they saw it in an ad, saw it online, their friend talked about it. It's about a brand or product or something. We try to like fire start that by doing some kind of fun thing to get people together. The Zwift example that I'll keep referencing, I think was a tremendous success for them, but also for other brands during the pandemic. But now when we're talking to brands about how do we want to do community building, it does come back to that shared experience. Like you want people to share an experience that they attribute to a brand and then kind of keep doing that. I mean, brands like Patagonia do this really well. It's like a aspirational thing. Like you want to be a part of like what they're trying to accomplish, like literally saving the planet. And you're like, what can I do to do that while like showing people that I'm a part of that with wearing the brands, this kind of thing. One recent example for us is an English brand called Albion, which is relatively small. They make cycling apparel, maybe like a competitor if you're all familiar with it, brands like Rafa, which have been around now for going on 15 plus years, if not longer, I think. And in their case, this is nothing new, but it's like Corona compatible in that they did a 12-hour challenge. You go out and ride your bike necessarily for 12 hours straight. You can go camp or something like that. You tag this brand, our client, and the other partner brands in an app called Komu, where you plan your route. You can share it, so they can also share the rides that you're doing. You can do it relatively in your neighborhood, and then you get like a prize afterwards, like for participating. But there are bigger prizes for like the coolest, most adventurous, or whatever. And then everyone feels like they took part in that. This isn't anything new. There's contests in general, but people sharing on the social media or in these kind of like ride sharing platforms. And that creates a community on like a global level, all kinds of countries where they haven't really even launched in, they certainly could ship product to. And then anyone that you meet, even on Zwift, but anywhere, if you've done that challenge, that's also the shared experience or thing that you can reference with those other people, and that creates that community that those people associate with the brand. So that's what I think of.
Yeah, so
yeah,
you
maybe
mentioned,
to speak of Zwift myself, because I'm a huge Zwifter, and I Zwift a couple of days a week usually. But also I just started to use it as another way to just get my, to get through the winter, because I was preparing for a longer ride that actually never happened, which should have been in the US last year, but because obviously everything was canceled, it didn't happen. But so I had the setup, and then I just joined one of those group rides, and I kept on joining these group rides where people, you start chatting a little bit, and there's this really engaging community. And now we actually ride while being on Discord and actually chatting to one another. We're doing 100-kilometer rides on Sundays. You start leading rides, you start joining a club. Honestly, like a year and a half ago, that's something that I didn't even think I would do, because I'm not that cyclist, where you think, oh, I need to join a club and I need to do these things, but also the convenience of just hopping on your bike and then doing that is great. So I love that. And we're not sponsored by Zwift, that's for sure. But it's something that actually, and maybe that's something that's a bit completely different, but a lot of the guys on the club, and I guess it's the same with Peloton or these other brands, they also said that these types of group rides and this repetition of exercise helped them a lot mentally, because obviously, and say for me, actually, it became almost like I wouldn't say addiction, but maybe something that I was looking forward to in the morning. I wake up at 5:30 to
a
do
healthy habit.
Yeah, exactly, a healthy habit for sure. Which if I don't cycle at 6 a.m. on Monday and Tuesday morning, I kind of feel more tired throughout the day. So like it has a lot of benefits, and that's maybe also why I'm such an evangelist for Zwift.
That's also what I wanted to say. Like, it sounds like some pure brand evangelism here. And John, you talked about this aspirational thing of sharing experiences, right? Patagonia leading the way, save the world, or ride in the future with Venmo. How do you go about locating evangelists? What are the tactics as, like, from a sports tech company, finding these evangelists, locating them, the ones that you will be able to motivate to talk about Zwift on a webinar, that kind of thing. How do you find people to be your brand evangelist?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind for me in the way that we do this in our own business is like, you don't get what you don't ask for. I think a lot of brands, if they're like seeding product or if they're doing campaigns, and if they don't make it clear like what's expected, we can keep riding this Zwift wave. Like whenever it comes to like ride leaders and stuff like that, I knew the people within their organization that onboarded those people. If we use the Rafa example, they got ride leaders and people that are just motivated to do that. And if we send product, whether it's cycling apparel, an actual bike, wheels, the navigation device, or the GPS computer that also can track like heart rate and other data points, make it very clear what you want them to do with that. Like one kind of like cliche thing in the bike world is when people get a bike, they either just post the bike or them with the bike, and they do like hashtag new bike day. So if it's like some big brand like Specialized or Canada or something like that, and they send some influencer a bike and there's like new bike day, and then they don't say anything else about the bike, if you really equip them with what you want them to do, make it clear, that's also gratifying for people. I think this varies generationally, but to use like the millennial buzzword, which many of us are, it appears, like it's gratifying to feel like you're like contributing to something. So if you give someone this like task, like if I give you this, can you do these things? And then they know if they do them, that's like contributing again to the aspirational thing. So you kind of create that, but I think sometimes people, especially in PR, are hesitant to make those asks. And that even goes for editors too. Like we talked about kind of the different use cases of products. I think it was something you were saying, Konstantin, way people might use something, maybe I'm making this up. But for some of these products, depending on what people are trying to do, if they're more data driven and they want to crunch all the numbers and pay attention to all these like kind of nerdy specifics and statistics about, I don't know, average performance metrics or whatever. But other people just want to have fun, and they use sports to like have fun with their friends or just get out and like explore or something. You have to cater to like what their preference is and play to that and tell them how to better tell that story. Yeah, that's, if that makes sense, maybe. Yeah.
Maybe something to add here as well is we want to, I think, guess you want to avoid, I mean, you want to be the evangelist and not the influencer, because for some reason there's this, I mean, it used to be kind of the same thing, but I guess now if you're an influencer, you're the person that's kind of just getting paid to say you like their product, which is the example you just said. I used to watch this really cool video producer, Casey Neistat, on YouTube, and he had I think the Thursday's unboxing day, because lots of people and companies just kept on sending him just packages just with the hope of him opening it on one of his videos, which obviously would give them a lot of free publicity, but that's, you know, that's kind of a gamble to take, and that's also not evangelizing for a product. When he talks about the boosted board, for example, which is an amazing product, I mean, I'm not a skater, but for example, you see him really loving that product, and that obviously gives that brand that much more clout. So I guess, and maybe that's going back to the beginning also of working with genuine and good people and trying to build up those relations. You want to work with people that evangelize your product, that are actually happy if you're being successful, like that you know, help you grow and do this. I mean, ideally, obviously, you don't have to pay them for, you kind of, they're just happy to do it because they love what you're doing. That's the type of people that you want to find. But again, I don't think that there's a pure recipe for that. Again, it's just by talking to them, by working with them, you know, by going out to dinner with them. But even then, I've built up great relationships with people in the sports tech industry over the last year, and we weren't even able to travel. So it's trying to build up that rapport, and then hoping that obviously they're on board with you for the ride.
I think the key word there is that it takes time. I mean, I'm used to saying this in the startup world, and I think the cycling industry is more used to this, but you can't really like growth hack this stuff. I mean, obviously, if like you onboarded 10 ambassadors, or, you know, randomly got, you know, several reviews super quickly, and you kind of try to ram it through very fast, you're not going to get the results that you would get if you took it a lot more slowly and built those relationships. And sometimes it does take ages, but I think that's just kind of adjusting your expectations ultimately, that you can't do this, you know, within 1 quarter or something, you know.
Like it feels like you said there's no formula for evangelism, but I mean, the things that I'm picking up here is that it's a sense of formula. It's formulaic, you know, building your brand. There's a formula to it, right? The block by block growth, making sure everything's personalized, and that extends, like you said, John, Konstantin, to the editors, but also to, you know, these evangelists that you want to attract as well. So from all corners of the, you know, the brand exercise, right? We're about at the end of our webinar, so if anybody has any questions, ask them now. But I'd really like it, guys, if you guys just share your tips, your tricks, or just the plain old advice that you have for anybody else trying to get into sports tech or sports PR, build their own brand in that industry. What would you guys give them to walk away with today?
I'd say, I mean, you can't really, I mean, I know that I love to plan. I like to have everything, you know, I'd love that. And I always do, by the way. I always have that plan, and I always write it down. And I think it's important because it kind of helps you to navigate it. And as you said, maybe it's not a formula, but it's formulaic, which I actually kind of like. But obviously along that road, you know, be open, share. Actually, like I used to just sit down and kind of just write down my own notes, and not really share much with other team members who are actually really interested in what we're doing, and like have an open communication. Go to them and ask them, hey, look, I'm having these and these ideas. What do you think? So I've done that a lot more by trying to go past some other colleagues to get a better idea of if they think what I think of makes sense, if they have some open feedback. Obviously that's easier when you're in an office situation, but even then, I mean, we've used tools like Miro, where I literally just draw out on a whiteboard, on a digital whiteboard, all of these ideas I have, and then we kind of put them together. I ask for brainstorming session a lot more nowadays, just to get an idea of what other people's input is. And then I think the second one is that don't get discouraged if maybe the first time it doesn't work. You know, keep trying. You know, you're smart. You know, you can do this. And keep iterating, keep making small changes if you really don't see it picking up. But it's also, you have to have patience. It's not something, and maybe that's more, maybe not to you, but again, if you get pressure from the management, communicate your plan and your kind of strategy with them, and ask them like, hey, what if this doesn't happen? Then, you know, maybe make a plan B. But kind of be open, communicate, and also obviously don't let yourself get discouraged, and you know, set yourself some goals that are ambitious but also achievable.
Thanks, Konstantin. John?
Yeah, thank you. I have kind of 3 main things. I took some notes here. From our perspective, like the agency perspective, pitching media about some sports tech product or service, whatever that might be. The main like go-to point would be is take a look at what people are already doing and see how your pitch fits that. For us, that's look at whether it's influencer, potential ambassador people, editors, journalists, other kind of content creator people, like YouTube people, like you mentioned, Konstantin. Look at what they're already doing and then reach out to them based on that, because those are the people that are likely to be like early adopters or interested in what you're doing. That is contrary to like a classic kind of spray and pray, we're going to get like the biggest newspapers, biggest outlets. If you're pitching editors and people that just aren't interested in what you're doing, this kind of goes without saying, but that's what has given us this like spam reputation. So that's the first point. Make sure you're barking up the right tree. Second one is actually, when you're doing that, look at those other trends and things. These might be competitive trends that are kind of like at odds with what you're doing, might be complementary. Maybe it works well with what you're doing. One of my favorite like introductions I've made in my career now doing this kind of work was between Komoot and Wahoo, because Komoot is for route planning, which you technically could do with other platforms. They're really strong in Germany, Austria, Switzerland. Wahoo from the States was really strong in England through a like pro team sponsorship they had back then. And they both wanted visibility in that other region and had complementary services, but were very siloed like culturally and regionally. So that was more like a strategic partnership kind of thing. But by watching on like an international level, what people were doing, like people were using this device, but planning routes with this, but they didn't communicate. So now they have a like API partnership, and that was their introduction that I made by kind of taking the second tip, like see kind of what's going on in the lay of the land. And the third one is like, don't drink too much of your own Kool-Aid. Like we talked about this, like being audacious and everything. Like you can get like too convinced that what you're trying to do. So I can rag on Famov maybe a little bit. Like it isn't just your bike that's the future. Like all bikes are the future. So let's see, you know what I mean? So all the tech stuff is cool, but you don't need a GPS to go for a ride. You don't need a heart rate monitor to go for a run. This kind of stuff, like the tech stuff is cool, but at the end of the day, it is about people. So when you're communicating, even in, like we said, your outbound or outward communications and stuff like that, like maybe less buzzwords and, so full of yourself, like just keep it reasonable, keep it real. Maybe that's my last point.
Cheers, guys. Well, I really appreciate you guys coming in, telling us about sports tech, sports PR, and building a brand for that. Thanks, guys, for everybody tuning in. We will share the recording of this video later with everybody who signed up. And if you guys have any questions, of course, you can reach out to PR Lab. And I'm sure Konstantin and John would also be interested to talk to you about Swift. So thank you very much. I really appreciated everybody coming aboard. It was great to get your expertise, and I hope you all have a great day.
Cheers. Thanks, I have that beer now.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good one. Take care.
Cheers. Yeah,
Bye.
thank you. Bye.
Cheers.